I have ridden long stretches where the sun forgets to move and the wind speaks in the voice of old men. Out there, a mile can feel like a year, and a year can pass in the time between a boot hitting the ground and dust settling back where it belongs. Those are the kinds of distances I carried in me when that winter came. The hard one, the one folks still talk about when their joints begin to ache. I had no ranch then, no roof that would keep a promise. I had a canvas roll, a skillet turned thin by fire, and a horse smart enough to pretend he did not know me when I sang to him. I do not sing well, but loneliness does not ask for quality. It asks for a sound you can set your breathing to. I camped that night in a fold of the prairie where the grass had learned to bow. Sky big and star-bitten, cottonwood scratching at the moon. The cold had a clean edge, and I liked that about it. Some hurts are muddy. Cold is honest. I built a small fire because big fires show a man's hopes, and I had trimmed mine down to what would fit in a tin cup. I cooked coffee, burned the bacon, sat with my back against a rock that did not care who I had been or who I planned to be. There are comforts in such things. I was not always a wanderer. There was a time I measured days by fence posts and seasons by calves on the ground. I remember a woman in a calico dress who laughed like creek water over stones. She said my name as if it had weight, and she was not afraid to lift it. We built a porch and lost it to fire, built another and lost it to debt. You could say the West took its share the way a river takes from a bank. Chunks at first, then inches, then a quiet stolen curve that you do not notice until the fence hangs in air and the field opens at the wrong end. When she died, I learned a thing about sound. The house did not become quieter. It found a new noise, thin and steady, like a rope pulled through dry hands. I left because some places keep you from living when they know too much. So I was on the drift in that sharp winter, moving town to town, trading days for coin and coin for quiet. You get good at silence if you practice. I could go a week without hearing my own voice and feel proud of it. Men think silence is strength. It is a kind of stubborn. Real strength is saying a word that binds you and not running when it tightens. Near midnight, the wind shifted. It carried a sound that was not coyote or limb, not a horse, something smaller. I stood and let the cold tell me the direction. South of the fire, a shape moved. 2 shapes, then 3, pressed close, as shadow to shadow. I stamped the ground once so my horse would know I was up to something that might demand apology. He flicked an ear and judged me uninteresting. They came out of the grass slow, the way you approach water when you are not sure it forgives. A woman first, coat too thin, cheekbones lit by the kind of hunger that eats memory before it eats flesh. Behind her, a girl with a shawl, a boy with a hat that tried to be brave. I saw the set of their shoulders and knew they had used up the last of their asking somewhere else. Sometimes you can smell refusal still clinging to a person, like smoke after a fire that did not want to start. She stopped at the edge of the firelight. Her hands were bare and red. I nodded at the skillet and the coffee and tried to make the gesture say more than it did. She hesitated, then stepped in with care, like she feared waking something. The children moved with that same thin grace. They sat without a word. The girl looked at the flames as if they were an old story she had half forgotten. We ate first. Bacon burned is still bacon. They did not pretend politeness, and I did not ask for it. Hunger is a clean language when you let it be. When the food was gone and the cup passed twice around the circle, the boy slid toward sleep. The girl did not. She watched me with eyes that counted what kind of man I might be. The woman kept her gaze where the light met the dark. At last she pulled a breath across her throat, as though it were a saw, and the cut had to be straight. "Sir," she said. Her voice had a rasp that winter gives to people who have traded voices for wind. "Sir, take my children." There are sentences that walk into a man and hang their coats as if they plan to stay. That was one. I felt it ease past the ribs and find a chair near the place where grief sits. The girl did not look surprised. The boy slept on. I put another stick on the fire because I could not put a thought anywhere useful. I asked where they had come from and where they thought they were going. She told me about a town that had run out of kindness ahead of flour. She told me about a man who left and a promise that did not. She told me about a woman named Mary at the mercantile who had given them a heel of bread and a look she could not eat, and about a preacher who blessed them with words that froze before they reached skin. Nothing in it was new to the West. Everything in it was new to them. When she was finished, she looked at the boy, and then the girl, and then the ground. "I'm strong enough to walk," she said. "I'm not strong enough to watch them fade. Take them to wherever men keep their promises. I will follow on my own feet. If I fall, I will fall after them, and the West can have me. I have stood in front of men with rifles and behind men with lies and felt less cornered. Desert nights make a church out of silence, and I do not mind prayer when it comes as breath in cold air." I looked at those children. I looked at her. I thought of a woman in a calico dress pinning a curtain against wind that always found a way through. I thought of the rope noise inside a house and how it still runs in me if I let it. A man is not a door, I told myself. He is a hinge. All that matters is what he lets swing open. I said her name then, though she had not offered it. Hunger teaches you things about people that they would rather not say. But names should be given, not taken. And I stopped with my mouth half open and offered my own instead. She said hers was Eliza. It sat between us a moment, small and brave. She gathered the children close and waited, not with patience, but with the kind of weariness that has run out of places to put its hands. I moved slow, so she would see each thought before it reached my lips. "Ma'am," I said, "I do not take what is not freely given, and I do not split what God or trouble is bound together. If I take them, I take you too." My voice sounded like a wagon wheel over dry creek stone. I was not trying to make it pretty. I wanted it to hold. The girl's eyes widened the way dawn does when it decides on a day. The boy stirred and turned his face deeper into sleep, as if he had found a warmer night. Eliza did not cry. Tears belong to people who have eaten, and I could not tell when she had last done that with a full jaw. She nodded once, a small thing. It hit like a hammer laid gently on a nail before a long drive. The wind thinned. The cold leaned in. I spread my bedroll wider and gave the children the middle where the heat lay thickest. Eliza sat opposite me, near enough to share breath, far enough to keep the nothing between us honest. I fed the fire into a low, steady glow. That was the first night. Later I would learn the patterns of their sleeping and the shapes of their laughter and what kind of song draws a smile out of a mouth that has forgotten the trick. Later I would call that night the hinge. But in the moment I only knew that the prairie had stopped feeling like a sentence and begun to sound like a vow. I laid my hat over my eyes and watched the flames through the brim shadow. A man can measure himself by how he keeps quiet. Sometimes the only words worth saying are the ones you intend to carry across the next 1,000 miles. I set mine down beside me like a saddle after a long ride and told myself I would lift them again at first light. I slept the way you sleep when a new job smells like old smoke, not deep, not clean, but with purpose, which is close to mercy when you have lived too long without it. Morning came slow, the way it does when the frost has no hurry to leave. The prairie was laid out in silver, every blade stiff as wire, every sound small and respectful. I woke before the sun, same as always, and stirred the ashes till a thread of heat rose up. The boy still slept between us, the girl curled around her knees. Eliza was awake, eyes open to the horizon, where the sky promised warmth and lied for another hour. I brewed what coffee I had left, black enough to make a man remember his sins. She thanked me with a nod and sipped like someone afraid the cup would vanish. We ate jerky in silence. The children woke to the smell and chewed without questions. There's a kind of gratitude that lives behind the ribs, quiet but full. That morning, I could feel it moving around the fire, timid but alive. When the sun finally climbed, I saw what the night had hidden. Her coat was torn under the arms, mended once, maybe twice, with thread that had given up. Her hands were blistered raw, cracked like dry creek beds. The boy's shoes were 2 sizes shy of mercy, and the girl's shawl had been patched from a flour sack. I have seen worse, but not on people who still carried themselves like they expected to matter. I packed slow, giving her time to change her mind. Folks sometimes do once the dark wears off. But she said nothing, just rolled the blanket she'd used and tied it with string. The boy rubbed his eyes and asked if we'd eat again today. I told him if the horse held and the road didn't turn against us, we'd see what kind of town lay ahead. He nodded, satisfied. The girl looked at me as if she'd already decided I was either fool or savior, maybe both. We rode single file, her walking beside the mare because she said she needed the movement to keep warm. I offered the saddle once, but she shook her head. A woman like that didn't lean on pity. She'd been holding the world upright too long. The children took turns on the horse, small bundles of stubborn wrapped in rags. The wind pushed at our backs, and I took it for a sign we were at least heading the right way. By noon the land began to open, broad and bare, with sagebrush clinging to what dignity it had left. You could see forever, but forever had a price. No shade, no water, just the sound of hooves striking cold earth. Eliza kept pace, step for step, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on something ahead that I couldn't see. Maybe a promise she'd made herself, maybe nothing at all. We stopped when the boy stumbled. His legs were too thin for pride, so I lifted him onto the mare and handed him my canteen. He drank, then passed it to his sister without a word. Eliza waited till they were done before she took it, just one swallow, careful as a prayer. I saw her hands tremble when she passed it back. You learn a lot riding in silence, the sound of breath, the drag of boots through dust, the way a person's shoulders start to fold when they've been carrying too much. By the 3rd hour, I knew her silence wasn't fear. It was a wall she'd built to keep her past from spilling into the day. I'd built the same wall once, and mine still stood half a mile behind me. We made camp near dusk by a dry riverbed. The sun went down mean and red, throwing long shadows that looked like memories. I found a dead mesquite branch and cut it for firewood. The children gathered brush, proud of their small hands doing big work. Eliza knelt beside the flames and warmed her fingers, her face lit soft and gold. That's when I saw it. The first ease, the smallest breath that didn't hurt. She spoke low, almost to herself. I used to think fire was for cooking. Now I think it's just for remembering what light feels like. I said it might. It's both, ma'am. You just gotta feed it enough to make it choose. She smiled then, faint but true, like dawn testing the edges of a long night. It was the first smile I'd seen that didn't belong to a ghost. The boy fell asleep mid-bite. The girl followed soon after. Eliza sat a while longer, staring into the coals. I could feel questions hanging in the air, the kind that have no good answers. She finally said, "Why'd you do it? You don't know us." I poked at the fire, buying time. I've been on the other side of hunger. It don't matter whose name it wears. That's not what I meant, she said. You could have turned away. Maybe. But a man spends enough nights alone. He starts mistaking silence for peace. It ain't. She looked at me long and quiet, as if weighing the truth in my voice. Peace, she said, almost tasting the word. I used to pray for that. Then I prayed, just to wake up. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite smoke and distant snow. I watched her hands, the way they folded in her lap, rough and unguarded. It struck me that she wasn't fragile. She was emptied out, like a well that still held the shape of water. When she turned to lie down, she said, thank you for seeing us." I didn't answer right away. The stars had come out, thin and cold, scattered like someone had dropped them by accident. I thought of all the faces I'd ridden past, all the names I'd forgotten to remember. "I see you," I said finally, "and that's enough for tonight." She pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes. The fire cracked, the horse shifted, and the night pressed in. I lay back on my bedroll, hat over my face, and listened to the steady sound of 3 people breathing in rhythm. It had been years since I'd shared that sound, years since it didn't hurt. Somewhere out there the river would run again come spring. The grass would rise green through the frost, and the world would go on pretending it didn't owe anyone anything. But under that cold sky, with her and those children beside me, I felt something I hadn't trusted in a long time. Stillness that didn't taste of sorrow. I told myself it was just the wind settling. I told myself it didn't mean a thing. But when I closed my eyes, I knew better. Some promises don't get spoken. They just start breathing. The next town sat low in a valley, half dust, half rumor. From the ridge we could see the outlines of rooftops, the thin thread of smoke, a church steeple trying to hold the sky in place. I told Eliza we'd find food there, maybe work, maybe a place to trade our weariness for something that might last a few days. She said she'd follow my lead, her voice level, but the corners of her mouth tightened like someone bracing for disappointment. We reached the main street near noon. The wind carried the smell of horses, old beer, and iron. A dog watched from a porch as we passed, not barking, just keeping count. People stopped what they were doing long enough to measure us, then went back to pretending they weren't curious. I've seen that look all across the frontier. It's not cruelty. It's the slow habit of people who have run out of trust. The general store was run by a man named Cobb. Big shoulders, soft eyes, a beard gone white, except for the stubborn streak under his chin. He recognized hunger when he saw it. I told him we needed flour, beans, salt, and maybe a little mercy. He said the first 3 would cost $2, and the fourth depended on the day. When I laid what money I had on the counter, he took it without counting and tossed in a bag of coffee for free. Cold coming, he said, you'll want something to keep your insides awake. Eliza stood behind me, quiet. The children pressed close. Cobb gave them each a peppermint stick, pretending it was part of the sale. The boys' eyes lit up, the girls' too, and Eliza's hand came to her mouth as if she'd forgotten what surprise felt like. We left with the sacks balanced across the mare and the kind of silence that feels almost like gratitude. I asked if she wanted to find a boarding house, but she shook her head. Too many eyes, she said, so we camped just outside town by the creek that wasn't frozen yet, a place where the water still argued with the rocks about who owned the winner. That night, we ate beans that tasted better than they should have. The children laughed, their voices chasing away the kind of quiet that had followed us since the first mile. Eliza smiled, a real one this time, wide enough to catch the firelight. For a moment I saw the woman she might have been before hunger made her a stranger to herself. When the children slept, she sat across from me, knees drawn up, hair loose around her face. I used to live near here, she said, before the sickness took the valley, before they buried my husband by the cottonwoods. Her eyes didn't shine when she said it. They were past tears. I told myself I'd never come back, but the road don't always listen. I nodded. The road's got its own mind. Always has. She looked at me over the fire. What about you? You running from something or just riding toward nothing? I thought about lying. I thought about saying I was a drifter by choice, a man who loved the wind more than walls, but the truth was heavy and wanted air. My wife died 3 winters ago. Fever took her before morning. I left the ranch 2 weeks later. Figured if I kept moving, grief wouldn't find me. Did it? She asked. Every time I stop, I said. We sat with that between us, the kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. The fire popped, throwing sparks that rose and died before they reached the sky. Eliza's face softened in the glow. You ever think grief don't chase us? Maybe it just walks beside, waiting till we're ready to see it. Her words landed like a stone in still water, quiet, deep, true. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need handling. The wind picked up, tugging at the edges of the fire. I tossed on another branch, and she leaned in for warmth. The space between us shrank till I could hear her breathing steady, not afraid, not expectant, just alive. You planning to keep heading west? She asked. I was, I said. But west keeps moving. She smiled faintly. That's what the wind says too. Later, when she lay down beside the children, I sat awake, listening to the creek talk to itself. I wondered what a man becomes when he starts to care again, whether it's a blessing or the first sign of weakness. The stars had their answers, but they spoke in a language I'd forgotten. In the morning, frost crusted the beans tin, and the ground cracked under our boots. We packed and moved on, following the road that bent north around the ridge. I found odd jobs where I could, mending fences, hauling freight, trading sweat for bread. Cobb at the store, spread word that I was honest, and soon the town let us stay without questions. We pitched a lean-to behind the livery. It wasn't much, but it held the wind back. Eliza kept the children fed with what I brought. She washed clothes for the townsfolk and somehow made each shirt smell like a promise. The girl learned to sweep the porch of the saloon for nickels, and the boy fetched water for Cobb's horses. Watching them, I felt something grow that was an obligation. It was smaller and slower, like a seed that didn't trust the soil yet. One evening, after the sun had drained itself behind the hills, I came back from a long day's work. The children were asleep. Eliza was sitting by the lantern, mending a tear in the boy's sleeve. Her hair caught the light like the last flame of a match. She didn't look up when I stepped in. "You should rest," I said. "So should you." I set down my hat and leaned against the post. Some habits die harder than others. She tied the thread, bit it clean, and held up the sleeve. "It's never the thread that breaks," she said. "It's the place you pull too tight." I don't know why that line cut through me the way it did. Maybe because I'd spent half my life pulling too tight on things I couldn't hold. I walked over, sat across from her, and said, "You ever think you've been given a second chance?" She thought for a long moment. "I think sometimes God sends people into our path to remind us we're still alive. The rest's up to us." The lantern flickered. The air smelled of soap and smoke, and something I hadn't felt in years. Home. I wanted to tell her that she and those children had turned my silence into something worth breaking. That every laugh from that boy, every hum from that girl, every quiet word from her had been teaching me to breathe again. But words like that belong to men who know how to keep them alive. I wasn't sure I did, so I said nothing. Just sat there till the flame burned low. The shadows stretched long, and the world outside forgot us for a while. That night, before I slept, I told myself I'd leave when spring came. I told myself it was the kind of thing to do. But when I closed my eyes, I saw the look in her face when she'd said thank you. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted kindness to mean leaving. Winter settled in like a guest who had no plans to leave. The wind came down from the high hills, sharp as a memory. Days grew shorter. Nights stretched long and unbroken, each one colder than the last. The little lean-to behind the livery turned to a refuge, small but ours. I patched the walls with burlap and old feed sacks, stuffed hay between the boards, anything to keep the draft from cutting straight through. The children learned to laugh even when they could see their breath. The boy took to feeding the horses before sunrise, proud as a ranch hand. The girl swept the porch of the mercantile and sang while she worked, a thin tune that somehow carried warmth. Cobb let her hum, said it kept the customers from remembering the cold. Eliza mended clothes, scrubbed laundry in the creek till the ice bit her knuckles, and still found time to keep a pot of beans simmering when I came in from the day. We grew into a kind of rhythm. No talk of tomorrow, no promises, just doing what had to be done. But every night, when the work was over, when the town lights went dim and the world fell still, I'd look across the fire and see her sitting there, hair pulled back, face lit by the flicker. And in those moments, something in me would quiet down, like the land itself was breathing through us. Sometimes we spoke about nothing, sometimes not at all. I told her stories of the trail, of places where the sand could swallow a man and still keep his hat clean, of nights so clear you could hear the stars crackle. She'd listen, half smiling, like the sound of another voice was enough to remind her that not everything had been lost. One night, she said, "Do you ever wish you'd stayed put? Built a fence high enough to keep the world out?" I stirred the fire and said, "Fences don't keep the world out. They just give it something to lean on while it watches you try." She laughed then, soft and surprised. It was the first sound in months that didn't carry any weight. When the snow came, it came hard. The sky turned white, the earth turned gray, and the road between them vanished. We holed up inside, burning through what little wood I'd gathered. The boy caught fever first, a cough that rattled like dry beans in a tin. Then the girl, Eliza, stayed awake for 2 nights straight, cooling their foreheads with rags dipped in melted snow. I sat by, useless as an empty pail, listening to her whisper prayers that sounded more like bargains. There's a kind of helplessness that no man's training prepares him for. You can mend fences, shoot straight, haul water, break horses, but when fever takes hold, you're back to being a child in front of something bigger than sense. On the 3rd night, the cough broke. The boy's breathing steadied. The girl's cheeks flushed with a faint, stubborn red. Eliza sagged against the wall, exhausted, and I caught her before she hit the floor. Her skin was hot, her breath shallow. "You've got it too," I said. She shook her head, tried to wave me off. "Just tired," she whispered, "but the fever climbed, same as before." I sat by her through the dark, changing rags, spooning what little water I could melt. The children slept close, dreaming through the sound of the wind gnawing at the walls. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "Don't let them go," she said. "I won't," I told her. "You rest now." She tried to smile, but it faded halfway. Then she slept. I stayed awake till morning, counting breaths. When the first light came through the cracks, she opened her eyes again. Clear this time, steady. "You kept your word," she said. "Why, I aim to," I answered. The fever broke by noon. She slept for a full day after that, and when she woke, the worst had passed. I stepped outside, boots sinking in the snow, and let the cold bite deep just to prove the world was still turning. The sun hung low, weak but stubborn. Smoke rose from the chimneys like prayers too small to bother the sky. That evening she joined me outside, wrapped in my coat. We stood side by side, watching the horizon fade from gold to gray. "You never told me your wife's name," she said. I hesitated. "Clara. She must have been something." "She was," I said, "strong, quiet, the kind of woman who believed in tomorrow. And now I just believe in getting through today." She nodded, pulling the coat tighter. "That's belief enough." I looked at her then, the lines of her face softened by the cold, eyes calm in the half-light. For the first time since Clara died, I felt something stir that wasn't grief. Not joy, not desire, just a kind of peace that didn't have to hide behind silence. Inside, the children were laughing again, their voices chasing one another through the walls. Eliza turned toward the sound, and I saw it in her face. The same thing I felt. Life returning, cautious but real. Later that night, as the fire burned low, I reached for the coffee pot and poured us both a cup. We sat close, hands wrapped around the warmth, watching the flames fold in on themselves. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Neither do I said, "but we'll face it upright." She smiled, and I found myself smiling back, not because the world had turned kinder, but because for once it didn't matter if it hadn't. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every footprint, every road behind us. The past was gone under that white. What lay ahead was quiet, unshaped, waiting. That was the night I stopped counting miles and started keeping time by the sound of her breathing beside me. When spring came, it came sudden, as if the land had grown tired of pretending to be dead. The snow melted in the span of a week, turning the fields to mud and the creek to a restless thing that wouldn't stay quiet. The air smelled different, wet, alive, forgiving. You could almost believe the world had decided to give us another chance. We left the lean-to once the thaw held steady. Cobb said he knew a man needing hands at a ranch 10 miles west, near the foothills. It wasn't much, but there'd be pay and a roof that didn't leak. I told him I'd take it. Eliza nodded before I even asked. The trail was soft under the hooves, ruts filled with water that caught the sky like mirrors. The children walked beside the mare, laughing at every puddle. Eliza rode behind me this time. I didn't ask her to. She just did. It felt right, the way her shadow fell alongside mine, the sound of her breathing mixing with the creak of the saddle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man headed nowhere. The ranch sat on a rise above a broad stretch of grass, framed by cottonwoods and a windmill that hadn't given up spinning. The foreman was a man named Talbot, gray hair, steady eyes, the kind that could weigh a man's worth by the way he stood. He looked us over, then nodded once. "You work, you eat," he said, "and you don't. You move on." It was fair. Fair's all a man can ask. He put me on fence duty. Long days of digging posts and stringing wire. Hard work, clean work. I'd forgotten how good it felt to end a day with sweat and purpose. Eliza took to the cookhouse, helping the women there with bread and stew. The children made friends quick, the way only those who've known hunger can, holding tight to joy when it shows up. Weeks passed in a kind of quiet rhythm. The land greened, the cattle fattened. I watched the world rebuild itself one blade of grass at a time. Some nights, when the wind turned soft, we'd sit outside after supper, the four of us. The boy would whittle, the girl hum. Eliza sew by the fading light. I'd listen, not saying much, letting their small sounds fill the space where loneliness used to live. One evening, Talbot rode up slow while I was mending a gate. "You're a family man?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. He nodded. "Good to see. Not many left who remember what that means." He looked out over the field. "Storm coming soon. Stay close when it breaks." Then he rode off, the dust rising behind him like an old warning. The storm hit 3 days later, a wall of wind and lightning rolling down from the hills. It came fast, mean, like it had been saving its temper just for us. I was out by the far fence when the first bolt hit, lighting the sky white as a scream. The mare spooked, nearly threw me. I turned her toward home, rain cutting sideways, thunder chasing every hoofbeat. When I reached the bunkhouse, the roof was rattling, the door slamming on its hinges. Inside, the children were huddled by the stove, eyes wide. Eliza was trying to hold the window shut with both hands, hair whipping in her face. I went to her, pushed the shutter closed, and braced it with my shoulder till the latch caught. The wind howled for hours, slamming against the boards like a thing alive. Every few minutes a flash lit the room, showing her face close to mine, calm in a way that steadied the air. The children clung to each other, whispering through the noise. When the storm finally broke near dawn, the world fell still in that strange way it does after fury spent. Rain dripped steady from the eaves. The sky went from black to pewter. We stepped outside into the wreckage, branches down, fences bent, mud thick enough to pull a boot clean off. But we were safe, all of us. Eliza stood beside me, her shawl soaked through. She looked at the horizon and said, "Funny how quiet feels louder after a storm." "It's the sound of things remembering they're alive," I said. She smiled, small but sure. "Maybe that's what we're doing too." That morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, the light caught her hair and turned it to copper. The children ran laughing through puddles, chasing each other, kicking water till the air sparkled with it. For the first time since I buried Clara, I didn't feel like a ghost among the living. That night, after the chores were done and the land lay calm again, Eliza brought me coffee out on the porch. We sat side by side, watching the stars reclaim the sky. The smell of wet earth and horses hung thick. She said, "You never asked why I was out there that night before you found us. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "We had a small place north of here. My husband got hurt in a stampede. Couldn't work. The town helped for a while, then stopped. When he passed, the rest went fast. House, food, everything. I kept walking because stopping meant dying." She turned the cup in her hands, "And then you found us." I didn't speak for a long time. The night didn't need words. Finally I said, "We all keep walking for something. Some of us just don't know what till we meet it." She looked at me then, steady and clear. "And what are you walking for, John?" Her voice saying my name did something to me. Something small, but deep. I met her eyes. "Maybe I've been walking toward this," I said. She didn't answer, just looked down at her hands, smiling like someone who'd found something fragile she didn't want to drop. From that night on, things felt different. We didn't talk about it, didn't need to. It was in the way she handed me my coffee each morning, in the way her shoulder brushed mine when we worked side by side, in the way the children started calling the bunkhouse home. I thought love was a thing you built fast, like a barn before a storm. Turns out it's quieter than that. It grows slow, like spring grass, soft underfoot, but stubborn enough to hold the earth together. And just like the grass, I didn't notice it happening until I looked down and saw it everywhere I stepped. By midsummer, the land was all light and hum. The grass whispered under the wind, and the sky stretched so wide it made a man feel small enough to pray without meaning to. Work was steady. The fences held, the cattle fattened, and the days ran together like water, poured from one jar to the next. I'd known hard seasons, but never one that carried this kind of quiet. Eliza had color in her cheeks again. The children's laughter no longer startled the air. It belonged to it now, as natural as the sound of the windmill turning. Each evening, we'd gather on the porch steps when the heat began to ease. The boy would lie back on the boards, tracing shapes in the sky, and the girl would hum that same tune she'd brought with her from hunger. Eliza would sit near me, her sewing in her lap, the thread glinting like a caught sunbeam. Sometimes I'd talk, mostly small stories, the way a horse finds its own trail home in the dark, the way coyotes learn to wait for thunder before they move. She listened, not saying much, and I came to understand that her silence wasn't distance. It was how she carried peace when she found it. One night, near harvest, we rode out to check the far pasture. The air was thick with heat, the sky crowded with stars. The children had stayed behind with the cook's wife, and it felt strange to ride without their chatter behind us. We spoke little. There was comfort in the rhythm of hooves and the smell of sun-baked sage. When we reached the ridge, we stopped to rest the horses. Below us, the valley lay wide and sleeping, the river curling silver through the dark. Fireflies moved through the grass like sparks too shy to rise. Eliza dismounted and walked a few paces ahead. The moon caught her hair, turned it pale and bright. I watched her breathe in the night, her shoulders lifting slow, steady. She said, "I used to think the world was made to break people. Now I think it just waits to see if we'll bend." I didn't answer right away. The truth in her words settled deep. "Maybe that's all we're doing," I said, "learning how to bend without breaking." She turned toward me, eyes calm, face open to the light. "You've been good to us, John. I hope you know what that means." I met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the air between us felt thick enough to stop time. I could have said 100 things, none of them enough. "I reckon you've been good to me too," I said. She smiled then, soft and sad, like she knew I was holding something back, but wouldn't push for it. "Come on," she said, "the night's getting cold." On the ride home, she sang under her breath, a hymn I hadn't heard in years. It was about mercy, about finding grace in the dust. I didn't know the words anymore, but I knew the feeling. It was the same one that rose in my chest whenever she laughed. When we reached the ranch, the house lamps were out. The children were asleep. We unsaddled in the dark, moving quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with everything left unsaid. Before she turned to go, she touched my arm just once, a small thing. Brief as breath, but it stayed with me through the night, through the dreams that came softer than they used to. After that, something in us shifted. Nothing said, nothing named, but it was there. I found myself listening for her steps in the morning, for the sound of her voice when she called the children in for supper. I'd catch her looking my way when she thought I wasn't watching, and I'd look back. That was all we needed. The ranch hands teased. Gentle and good-natured, Talbot just grinned and said, "The West's a wide place, but it don't leave much room for secrets." I didn't bother denying it. One evening, we took the wagon into town for supplies. The children ran ahead to the store, laughing. Eliza walked beside me, her skirt brushing the dust, her hand grazing mine now and then. It wasn't an accident, and I didn't move away. Inside, Cobb greeted us with that slow, knowing smile of his. "Didn't think I'd see you back this way," he said to her. "Neither did I," she answered. "Nah." He looked at me, then at her, and nodded like a man seeing something right itself. "Sometimes folks find what they weren't looking for," he said. We bought flour, coffee, a spool of blue thread the girl picked for her mother. Before we left, Cobb slipped a small parcel into my hand, brown paper tied with string. "For when you're ready," he said. "Back at the ranch, when the children were asleep, I opened it. Inside was a photograph, sepia and faded, of a family standing in front of a wagon, the kind that carried dreams west. Cobb must have known it meant something. Maybe he saw in us what that picture once held, a a start. Eliza looked at it, her eyes soft. "They look tired," she said. "Maybe they were," I said. "But they're together." She nodded. "That's enough." That night, the wind changed again, warm and carrying the smell of rain. I dreamed of Clara for the first time in months. She was standing in a field, smiling, not sad, not distant, just there. When I woke, the world felt lighter, like even my memories had decided to let me breathe. In the gray before dawn, I sat outside with my coffee, watching the light creep in. Eliza came to stand beside me, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Neither of us spoke. The sun rose slow, turning the horizon to gold. After a long while, she said, "You ever think some souls are just meant to meet again in different lives, different places?" I looked at her, the light catching her face, soft and sure. "I think maybe some don't stop walking till they do." She smiled. "Then I'm glad you didn't stop walking." And just like that, the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was home. By autumn, the ranch had turned gold. The fields swayed like a slow ocean, and the air carried that thin edge of chill that makes a man think of firelight and quiet talk. The work was good, the kind that wore out the body but left the mind clean. The children had grown into the land, barefoot and laughing, chasing the season through tall grass and fence lines. Eliza ran the kitchen by then. Her bread had become something of legend. The men would linger near the door, pretending to be thirsty just to catch the smell of it baking. She took their teasing with that small smile of hers, the one that never showed teeth but said plenty. For me, the days had become a rhythm of honest labor and stolen moments. I'd catch her eyes from across the yard, and for a heartbeat, it was as though the noise of the world paused, waiting for us to breathe. I kept telling myself it was enough to work beside her, to share the same table, to watch her laugh with the children. But I'd lie awake at night, staring at the rafters, listening to the wind find its way through the cracks. There's a kind of loneliness that stays even when you're no longer alone. Not because something's missing, but because you're afraid to name what isn't. One evening, Talbot called me to the porch. The sunset was fading slow, and he was sitting there, hat in his lap, boots muddy from the lower field. "I've been watching," he said, his voice the kind that carried years without bragging about them. "You've got a good hand and a good heart. This place needs both." I nodded, unsure where he was going. "You planning on moving come winter?" I thought about the road, the way it used to call me when I had nothing left to lose. But now, every path I pictured led back here, to her, to them. "No," I said, "I reckon I'll stay." Talbot smiled. "That's what I hoped. A place only grows when the right folks put down roots." He stood, clapped my shoulder, and left it at that. That night, I found Eliza sitting by the barn, mending the boy's shirt. The lantern light caught her face, soft and steady. The crickets filled the dark like a hymn. "Talbot says I should stay on," I said. She didn't look up right away. "And what do you say?" "I say he's right." She nodded, setting the needle down. "The children will be glad." "And you?" The question hung there longer than it should have. She breathed in slow. "I'm glad too, John." I sat beside her, the smell of hay thick around us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I used to think a man's word was all he owed the world. Now I think it's what he gives it." "I gave mine to you the night we met," I said quietly. "Didn't know it then, but I did." She looked at me then. Really looked. Her eyes had that calm you find only after storms, when everything broken has learned its place again. "You kept it," she said. We sat there till the lantern burned low, her hand resting close enough that I could feel the warmth of it, steady and human. When she rose to go, she didn't say goodnight. She didn't have to. In the days that followed, the season deepened. The leaves turned copper, the mornings crisp. The children gathered acorns and painted them with mud, proud of their creation. The ranch felt alive, almost sacred. Then came a letter. Cobb rode out from town to bring it. A rare thing, letters. He handed it to me without a word. The paper was creased, the ink smudged from travel. It bore the seal of a name I hadn't seen in years, my brother's. He wrote that our father's ranch back east had gone under, that he'd sold what was left and was headed west, looking for work. He asked if I still had a place for him, or if the West had taken all of me too. I folded the letter slow. The past has a way of showing up just when you've learned to live without it. Eliza found me by the fence that evening. I told her what the letter said. She listened, quiet as always. "Will you go?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. There's nothing left there but ghosts. Sometimes ghosts come looking for peace too. I'm not sure I've got any to give. She stepped closer then, her hand finding my arm. "Maybe you've got more than you think." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. I looked at her hand, small against the sleeve of my shirt, and then at the horizon, the same one that used to mean freedom, now just a line that led away from everything I wanted. "I'll write him," I said. "Tell him there's room here if he wants to work for it." She smiled. "That's a good answer." The next week, my brother arrived. His hair had gone gray early, his eyes sharper than I remembered. He carried the road in his posture like it had molded him to its will. We didn't speak much that first night. Brothers don't need to. We just sat by the fire, two men measuring the distance between what was and what is. Eliza made stew, the children listening wide-eyed to his stories of the trail. I watched her moving around the room, steady and sure, and felt something settle in me, a kind of belonging I'd never had before. Later, when the others had gone to bed, my brother said, "You found something here, don't let it slip. Not all of us get that lucky." I looked toward the doorway where her shadow moved, soft against the lamplight. "I know," I said. He smiled, tired but genuine, then held it with both hands. When the fire died down and the night took back the silence, I lay awake listening to the soft murmur of the house, the sigh of wood, the slow breathing of the ones inside it. For the first time, the word home didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a place that could still grow around me if I let it. So first frost came early that year. You could taste it in the air before sunrise, that crisp sharpness that makes a man pull his collar higher and breathe slower. The land, once gold and easy, turned pale under the morning light. The cattle moved slower too, steam rising off their backs like ghosts leaving the earth. Life on the ranch shifted into the rhythm of the cold. Days shorter, nights longer, chores harder. But it was honest work, the kind that kept a man grounded. I'd wake before dawn, strike a match to the lantern, and listen to the wind rubbing against the boards. Eliza would already be stirring. Coffee brewing, the smell of bread thick in the air. The children had grown into themselves, taller, stronger, carrying laughter like it was something they owned outright. We'd sit around the table in the half-light, hands wrapped around tin cups, the fire whispering in the stove. Those mornings were quiet, sacred in a way that words couldn't touch. Hey, sometimes she'd hum while she worked, a tune with no name but a memory in it. I'd listen, and something inside me would unclench. My brother took to the ranch easy enough. He had the same stubborn streak as me, same silence when he worked. The two of us fixed fences, wrangled strays, shared jokes only brothers could. It felt like old times, except now there was laughter between the silences and a woman's voice calling the world back to gentleness. Still, winter has a way of testing what summer builds. Around mid-December, the snow came hard, thick and relentless, covering the land in a white that erased everything it touched. The cattle drifted toward the lowlands. The fences disappeared under drifts. We worked from dawn till dark, pushing through wind that could flay a man's face raw. One night, the storm hit worse than any before. The wind screamed down the valley like it had bones to break. I was out in it with my brother, driving the herd toward shelter when I heard the crack, a tree giving way near the north fence. He shouted. I turned, and the world went white. When I woke, I was half buried in snow. The cold bit deep, mean and patient. I clawed my way free, called his name, and got nothing but wind for an answer. My horse was gone. The world spun. White sky, white ground, no difference between them. I staggered until my knees gave. Somewhere in the blur, I saw a light. Maybe it was a lantern. Maybe it was the kind of thing a man sees when the dark starts closing in. By the time I reached the bunkhouse, my hands were stiff as wood. Eliza was there, face pale, eyes wild. She pulled me inside, stripped the ice from my coat, pressed my fingers between her palms. The children hovered close, quiet as prayers. Where's your brother? She asked. I shook my head. Didn't see him after the fall. She closed her eyes just once, then nodded. He'll find his way if the Lord's willing. The storm lasted 3 days. On the 4th, it broke. The sky cleared, sharp and blue. We found him a mile from the fence line, lying still, his coat half buried. He hadn't frozen scared. Just still, like a man who decided not to fight anymore. We brought him back, laid him in the earth near the cottonwoods, where the land rises gentle toward the hills. The children asked if he was with God. Eliza said, "No, he's with peace." That night, I sat alone by the fire, listening to the wood pop. The house felt smaller, quieter. Death doesn't shout, it whispers. It reminded me that the West keeps its own kind of tally, fair but final. When Eliza came to sit beside me, she didn't speak. She just reached out and rested her hand on mine. Her skin was warm, the kind of warmth that feels borrowed from something higher. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I looked at the flames. He was tired. Maybe this was the only way he could rest. She leaned against me then, her head light on my shoulder. The room held its breath. I could feel her heartbeat through the fabric of her dress, slow and steady, reminding mine to keep pace. We sat that way for a long time. The snow melted off the roof, drop by drop. Outside, the wind moved gentler, as though the world had decided to ease up for a while. In the days that followed, she kept the house full. Children's laughter, bread baking, light in the windows. I buried myself in work, fixing what the storm had broken, mending fences, setting posts in frozen ground. But every time I came in from the cold, The first thing I saw was her by the fire, mending something, humming softly, and every time I felt the ache in me quiet. One night, after the children were asleep, she came to me. The lamp was low, throwing gold across the floor. "You can't keep blaming yourself for every loss," she said. I stared into my coffee. "Loss is all I've known." She shook her head. "No, John. You've known how to stay. That's rarer." I didn't know what to say to that. Words felt too small for what rose in my chest. She stepped closer, her hand finding the back of my neck, fingers light, trembling. I looked at her, really looked, at the lines the years had carved, the calm in her eyes, the strength she didn't even know she carried. And for the first time since Clara died, I let myself breathe without guilt. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't sudden either. It was quiet, certain, like something that had been waiting for its moment all along. The fire cracked, the wind hushed, and in that stillness, the years between loss and love finally laid themselves down. When she pulled back, she didn't speak, neither did I. Words would have ruined it. She touched her forehead to mine, a small gesture, but it said everything. Then she turned and went to the children's room, her steps soft, sure. I sat there for a long time, feeling the warmth of her still on my lips, the peace of her hand still resting against the back of my neck. The fire burned low, the last embers whispering what I already knew. The West hadn't taken everything from me after all. It had just held on to what I wasn't ready to keep, until I was. Winter gave way to a slow, stubborn spring, the kind that tested a man's patience before it offered its reward. The snow melted in long streaks, the mud deep enough to steal a boot, and the air carried that smell of wet earth and new chances. By then months had passed since my brother's burial, yet I still caught myself glancing toward the ridge as if he might come walking through the fog with that half-grin of his, asking what was for supper. Eliza never said much about that night between us, and neither did I, but something had settled, something quiet and sure. The space between us had changed shape. It was no longer filled with distance, but with understanding, the kind that didn't need naming. Each morning began the same. I'd step out before dawn, boots sinking into the thaw, the world gray and waiting. Inside, I'd hear her stirring, soft footsteps, the creak of a chair, the hiss of water meeting the stove. The smell of coffee drifted through the cracks before the light did. It was those small sounds that held me together more than I realized. The children had grown into the rhythm of the ranch. The boy followed me from chore to chore, a small shadow learning the weight of tools and the patience of fences. The girl helped her mother, or trailed after the cook, her laughter always rising at the right moments. They'd become the pulse of the place, steady, bright, necessary. Sometimes when the day was long and the sun worked hard, I'd catch Eliza watching them from the porch, her eyes soft, the wind pulling at her hair. That look, half pride, half disbelief, was the kind that turns the ordinary into a kind of grace. One evening, Talbot called me over after supper. He was sitting at the end of the barn, smoking his pipe, watching the light fade over the hills. "You've done right by this place," he said, "and by her." I didn't answer. He wasn't the kind of man who said things twice. He drew a slow breath, letting the smoke curl upward. "Ain't my business, but there's a preacher passing through town next month. Could stop by if you wanted." I looked at the ground, scuffing my boot through the dirt. "You asking me to make something official?" He smiled, not looking at me. "I'm asking you to stop pretending it already ain't." That night, I lay awake listening to the storm doors rattle in the wind, thinking about what he'd said. The idea of a preacher, of vows spoken aloud, of a future set in something firmer than habit. It scared me more than it should have. But it didn't scare me because I doubted her. It scared me because for the first time in years, I could see what I stood to lose. The next morning, I found her in the yard hanging laundry. The sheets billowed white against the blue of the sky, catching the wind like sails. I watched her a while before speaking. "Talbot says a preacher's coming through," I said. She turned, the clothespin still between her fingers. "Does he? Thought maybe we'd let him stop here, have supper. Maybe say a few words." Her hand stilled on the line. "What kind of words?" "The kind that make things clear," I said. She studied me for a moment, eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. Then she smiled, not shy, not surprised, just calm. "You always did take your time getting to the point." I shrugged. I'm a slow man, but I mean what I say." "I know," she said. "That's why I listened." The breeze picked up, tugging the sheet between us until it lifted, pale and weightless, like the ghost of everything we'd both survived. When it fell again, she was smiling at me through it, her eyes bright, steady. We married the next week, under the cottonwoods near the creek. Cobb came out from town with his wife. Talbot stood as witness, and the children carried wildflowers they'd gathered from the field. It wasn't a big affair. No music, no fine clothes, no long speeches. Just a few words, spoken plain, and two people standing still enough to let the moment find them. When the preacher asked if I would keep her, I said I already have. When he asked if she would stay, she said, I already did. The wind moved through the trees like a prayer that didn't need an amen. After we all sat down to eat, stew simmering in a tin pot, bread warm from the oven, the children chased each other through the tall grass until the sun dipped low. Cobb poured me a cup of coffee, smiled, and said, "You done walked a long road to find this." "Didn't know I was walking toward it," I said. "That's the way of it," he replied. "Good things don't shout. They wait." When the day ended and the guests had gone, Eliza and I sat on the porch watching the last light fade. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the air sweet with the smell of rain somewhere far off. The children slept inside, their laughter still echoing faintly from the walls. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "You think it'll last?" she asked. I looked out over the land, the fields rolling into the distance, the creek glinting like a promise. "Nothing lasts," I said, "but we'll keep it while it does." She nodded, her fingers finding mine. The night folded around us, warm, still, alive. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't before. Love in the West isn't loud or fast. It doesn't blaze. It holds steady, like a lantern in the wind, never bright enough to light the whole world, but just enough to keep you walking home. Years have a way of slipping quiet. You don't notice them leave until one morning you wake and realize the boy's voice has deepened. The girl's laugh sounds like her mother's, and the lines on your hands have turned to rivers that weren't there before. Time does that. It doesn't steal. It trades. It gives you weight where youth once was, Peace where fire used to live. The ranch stayed good to us. The land never forgot our work, and we never forgot how to thank it. Seasons came and went like old songs you hum without knowing when they started. Calves were born, fences mended, crops grew thick in the low fields. The children ran wild through the summers and came home with dirt on their knees and light in their eyes. Eliza aged the way the land does, slow, beautiful, honest. Her hair silvered at the edges. Her hands carried the story of everything she'd built, everything she'd held. Sometimes, in the soft blue of evening, I'd watch her standing on the porch with the wind pulling at her shawl, and it would hit me all over again. How something broken could grow so whole. The boy, Samuel, took to ranching like it was in his blood. By 19, he could ride a line of cattle through a storm without flinching. The girl, May, had her mother's steadiness. She sang when she worked, soft and sure, and the sound made even the hardest days light. They both had pieces of me too, I suppose. The restlessness, the quiet that only the prairie understands. There were nights when the four of us would sit out after supper, the fire low, the sky spilling stars across the horizon. Those were the kind of nights that make you forget how hard the world can be. Eliza would hum, May would lean against her shoulder, and Sam would toss another stick on the flames just to keep the glow alive a little longer. I'd listen and think this is what all the miles were for. Not gold, not glory, just this sound, the sound of peace settling in. But the West has its own way of reminding a man that nothing belongs to him forever. The spring of the 5th year after our marriage, a fever ran through the valley. It took livestock first, then found people. Cobb's wife went early, then a hand from the neighboring ranch. We kept to ourselves, prayed the wind would pass us by. It didn't. Eliza fell sick one morning before dawn. I woke to her breathing wrong, shallow, catching like wind through reeds. The children slept in the next room, unaware that the world had shifted under their feet. I carried her to the bed, sat beside her, did everything I knew how to do. Cold cloth, water, prayers I hadn't said since Clara. For 2 days she fought. For 2 days I watched the light in her eyes dim and flare, like a lantern trying to stay lit in a storm. She never cried, never complained. She only looked at me with that same calm she carried since the first night I met her, when she'd stood in the cold and asked me to take her children. On the second night, when the fever broke for a moment and her mind cleared, she reached for my hand. "You remember that night by the fire," she whispered, "when you told me the West hadn't taken everything?" "I remember," I said. "You were right," she breathed. "It gave me you." Her fingers tightened around mine, light but sure. "Don't forget to keep living, John. Promise me that." "I promise," I said, but the words broke in my throat. She smiled, a small, tired thing. "Good," she said, "because you've still got a long way to walk." Then she closed her eyes. The house went still. The night held its breath, and I sat there till the light came, holding her hand long after it had gone cold. We buried her under the cottonwoods, where the land rises gentle toward the creek. May laid a shawl across the grave. Samuel placed his mother's Bible on top. The wind moved through the branches, soft as her voice. After that, the days blurred. Work kept me upright, but it was the children who kept me breathing. May filled the house with her mother's songs. Samuel took the weight of the ranch onto his young shoulders. They grew into the world the way she would have wanted. Honest, strong, kind. And me, I grew older. I learned that love doesn't end when a body does. It stays. It lingers in the smell of coffee at dawn, in the sound of rain on the roof, in the way the sky blushes just before dark. It lives in the people left behind, carrying on what the lost ones began. Now, most evenings I sit on that same porch, hat in my lap, the fields spread wide before me. The children are grown, the world quieter, the air's full of the hum of crickets and the whisper of the wind through grass. Sometimes, when the light fades just right, I swear I see her standing out there, near the creek, hair loose, hands clasped, watching the sun set the way she always did. I don't call out. I just sit and let the memory breathe. If the West taught me anything, it's that life isn't about holding on. It's about keeping faith while the wind takes what it must. She once told me some souls are meant to meet again. Maybe she was right. Maybe she's just waiting beyond that last ridge where the sky bends low and the dust turns to light. Till then, I'll keep my promise. I'll keep living. And every time the wind moves through those cottonwoods, I'll know she's walking beside me still.